Welcome back, everybody. This is Brian Marshall, host of the C-Suite Sherpa Podcast, where we focus on great resources for the C-Suite. Speaking of which, we've got Mike Moffitt, founder of CFG Legacy Planners. Mike's firm is a growth and exit firm focused on building long-term, multi-generational, trust-based relationships with successful and ethical business owners. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Brian. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about CFG and what you do and who you do it with.
You'd have to go back a few years to get to how this all first came about. Most of my life, I was a financial advisor, and I started in 1987. So I had about 36, 37 years in the business. And one of the things I really enjoyed doing during that time period is working with business owners. Actually, one of the things that appealed to me about working with business owners is the challenges that they had that the normal individual might not have. And I found that was something that I really found challenge in. After 30 some years, I thought, okay, what am I going to do for my next act in life? And I kind of decided, I think I want to spin off the asset management part of the business, sell that, and focus exclusively on working with business owners, helping them both with their growth plans and then eventually their exit, because I knew, the statistics are there's going to be a whole lot of them going through what I was going through, looking at transitioning at some point in time. So that's how CFG Legacy Planners got started. I really enjoyed it. I like the challenge and looking forward to growing that business into something that is similar to what I did the first go around with the financial advisory business.
Yeah, no, that's one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the podcast today, because you've got a great story. You've actually been through the very thing that you're guiding your clients through. Tell us about that journey that you were on, where you go from deciding to take the thing you created, all those years ago, when you were a young man, like, back in the day when I was a young man. I mean, we were excited, enthusiastic, and that you grew that. That was almost like, for me, it was like a child, right? It's like sending a child off to the world when you sell a business. I've had 6 exits, and I'll tell you, not all exits are created equal. Not all of them are good. Bankruptcy is an exit. Death is an exit. And most of us don't even think about that, right? So tell us about your journey.
Often the exit. I could tell you a story about how it was the exit for my brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Probably a story for another day.
Yeah, but tell us about your exit. Let's talk about that, and then we can see where we go from there.
Yeah, I remember a good friend of mine who's a consultant, a business consultant. He said, it's probably the 3rd or 4th time when you're going to be successful at this. There's going to be some fits and starts in the process. And originally I thought what I would do is kind of grow my own, right? I'd bring in an advisor, mentor them, and eventually transition or sell the business to that person. And I went through that twice. Neither one were quite the right fit. So it got to the point where I thought, okay, let me see what my other options are. In our particular industry, in the financial advisor industry, there's a lot of consolidation going on right now. So it was not really hard to find a buyer of my business, but there were some goals that I'd set out for myself that they weren't going to help me with. And that's not to say that it might not be a good fit for somebody else in my shoes, but it was something I created from scratch, Cornerstone Financial Group, and it was something I would like to see.
You wanted to take that and have it continue to exist beyond your tenure as the operator, beyond your stewardship, if you will.
Yeah, maybe that was kind of a pride sort of thing. I don't know. But most of the consolidators, they're just buying up practices like mine, and then it becomes my business ceased to exist, and I work for them for a year or so and fade off into the sunset. And I want somebody who would continue to grow my practice. So that eliminated a lot of folks.
Right.
But at least I knew at the time I had options, right? And when you're talking of other businesses, some have more options than others, I'm sure. But in my particular case, I essentially used a recruiter to go out and look for folks who might be interested in buying a practice and sorting out the ones who are not consolidators.
Now, how long before you started to, when you made the decision that it was time to think about selling, and then how long did it take from that moment till the time you actually closed the deal?
Patience is a virtue. I would say it probably took a little over a year. I would say it took 6 to 8 months to find people. But the nice thing about that part of the process was I told them up front, if you only have one entity vying for your business, you don't have a lot of options. So I wanted 2 or 3 that would actually be bidding against each other for the business. And that's what we narrowed it down to 2. And at that point, and like I said, that probably took 6 to 8 months. Once I found the person that I wanted to buy the business, I would say, well, I met him in January and we closed in October.
Okay.
And actually, as business sales go, that probably was pretty quick.
That is quick. Yeah. I wanted to ask that because I think most owners listening to this right now are thinking, yeah, I'll work until like the year I want to retire, sell, exit, and then I'll put it up for sale, like putting a yard sign, a realtor sign in your front yard. And then 3 months later, I'll be on the beach in Florida somewhere. That's just not how that works. It takes years of prepping your business for an exit intentionally to really get max value. And then you put it on the market and then you deal with the whole assortment of buyers, some serious, some lowballers, some people looking to come in and steal it from you, to try to find that person or that group that's going to come in and, like you said, carry on the legacy that you wanted. So that's actually pretty quick. So I just wanted to point out it's usually not that fast.
Yeah, well, I got a formal valuation probably 2 years before I contacted the recruiter. So, and that actually was a fairly short time period too.
Right.
In the standpoint of how long it would take me to make progress in adding value to the business.
Right.
Our company is based out of a town of 8,000. So there was nobody in town who could take over. I mean, they had to be properly licensed, right? There's nobody in town who could do that. So I had to find somebody out of town, obviously, and who would be willing to come to town.
Exactly.
I mean, but the process of improving the value of the business, we did that over a 2 or 3 year period.
That's right. Yeah, that's proper planning right there. And fortunately, you're in an industry at that point where there were known valuations. That was a very known model in terms of your book of business times a multiplier. I mean, there are some industries, some businesses where there's not a lot of comps. It's not known what the valuation math looks like, right? And so you have to kind of pioneer that and make it safe for the buyer. Because really, what people don't realize is buyers, when they buy a business, they're buying your future revenue, but they're also mitigating any risk associated with the fact that you're leaving. So that's why, the business may be worth 5 million with you in it today, but with you out of it, it's either going to be an earnout, which means they'll give you half of that up front. The other half is going to be earned. Most earnouts don't usually work well for the seller. So anyway, so tell us more about that. So you put it up, you found a buyer. Tell us about the bumps along the way, the challenges, and maybe something, things that you would go back and would have coached yourself on that you learned after you went through it that you didn't know then.
Well, by the time I got to the third go round, when I found the actual buyer, I'd already kind of been through a lot of the mistakes before I actually sold it. So that was a good thing. When I got the formal valuation, I got a chance to see what the detractors were from the value of the business. The recurring revenue, you kind of alluded to that earlier. That's a real big one.
Yeah.
And with a lot of businesses, it's hard to get recurring revenue, but obviously that and a growing stream of revenue, if you can show a growing, it's growing.
You're right.
Yeah. So I don't, as I got to the point of actually, when we found the buyer, one of the things I would say was in both of the prior cases, it was more of me thinking, I'm going to bring this person in and I'm going to essentially promise them that they can buy the business if they meet certain bogeys or, certain things that we wanted them to do. And in the long run, they kind of didn't meet it. So we never got to the point of talking about the sale. Third time around, I made it clear that if they were interested, they'd have to put skin in the game. And we were going to spend a little more time dating.
Yeah. The opposite of an earn out, they had to earn your trust and establish credibility for the right to be able to buy the business from you.
Yeah. Now, as far as the deal, it really wasn't, and I know not all businesses can do it this way. That's one of the nice things about putting a sale together, though, is everybody's got their own special nuances that they can put towards a deal. And there's a lot of give and take in all those. But my particular one had a fixed component. Well, first off, I know a lot of business owners like to probably get all the cash up front. I've got other stuff going. I didn't really need the income. I vetted the buyer and felt like the payments could be made, so I sold it on contract.
Okay.
With a fixed component, which was fixed payments, and a variable component, but which could look like an earn out, except for the fact that it was set up so there was a minimum amount. There was a fixed amount I was going to get even with the variable component. I could earn more if the business did well, but I couldn't earn less. So that part gave him a little bit of flexibility. So if in that particular business, obviously it's kind of contingent on how the market's doing. So if the market wasn't doing well, he would basically have to extend his payments, but he couldn't lessen them. So I worked with him from that standpoint.
Good.
But small town, normally you wouldn't have a lot of options. And we ended up with 3 or 4. I picked 2, interviewed them both, and ended up with the one that we did the deal with.
Yeah. So I guess in summary, because I want to spend a few minutes talking about your new venture, but in summary, you were prepared. You learned a lot in the process. You went through a couple of iterations of what you thought were the buyers, which is not unusual. That happens a lot. And then you were pretty solid in terms of what you expected. You didn't settle for less. You didn't get desperate. You didn't sell from a distress standpoint, and you ended up with a nice exit. And the reason I wanted to make sure we covered that is I want our audience to know that you're not just somebody saying, hey, I can't wait to see how this works. Let me see if my theories work. You're actually somebody who's been through it. And from that place of wisdom, you're going to guide clients to go through that process and help them be an advocate for the seller to make sure that they actually prepare properly on through to the exit and even maybe helping them negotiate. So let's pivot. Let's spend a few minutes talking about your new venture and what you're doing. And then we'll wrap up. So give us a 90-second summary of your current business.
Well, CFG Legacy Planners essentially helps people do what I did, grow the business and make that determination. Are you going to continue the business or are you going to exit the business? And if you're going to exit the business, what are your various options? There are quite a few folks who say they can help you sell your business. Obviously, some of the ones that are most often thought about are probably CPAs, but they've, in most cases, never sold their business. There's just such a huge difference in the qualifications and the expertise of the CPAs. Some of them are more about doing tax returns and you haven't been doing much in the way of transactions.
And they're probably not specialists in growth. Growth is a huge factor in the valuation of your business. They want to see a growing business, not like the last 6 months, but the last 3, 4, 5 years. They want to show a history of growth. At the other end of the spectrum are business brokers who, when you go to a business broker, they're going to sell it as is.
Yeah.
And a lot of brokers have to tell people, you're not ready. Come back when you're ready. And the problem is they don't come back because they don't know how to get ready. You're going to help people get ready so that when they go to sell it, they're going to get maximum value, attract a strategic buyer who's going to pay maximum value, and they've made the business attractive by de-risking, mitigating the risk of them, the primary person who is running that business, the owner, is going to leave. Because at the end of the day, none of us as owners want to do an earnout unless it's something like you orchestrated where it was actually to your benefit to kind of be the contract seller. It's like selling a house on contract.
You had a chance to make more on the back end.
Except for you have a chance to make more on the back end based on performance. So tell us.
You know, one of the things I'd say though is don't wait until the last minute to get started in the process. And it still took me 2 years before really I was ready for market.
Right.
And so many owners just make the decision all at once that they want to sell, and then they want to know how to go about that. And so they'll talk to their accountant, and the accountant maybe talks to a business broker. Or they don't even really go over the options that are available to the business owner. But if you don't do any planning, you do have fewer options.
That's right. And it's not a liquid market. It's not like a stock that's publicly listed. It's not like the real estate market where you put it out there and realtors bring buyers to you. It's a whole different proposition. Most people never have a chance to do it twice, so they don't really know what they're getting into. Be prepared. Don't wait till the last minute. Be patient. And
that's a good
by the
one
way,
too.
Don't put yourself in a situation where you're a distressed seller, because buyers can smell that a mile away.
Yeah.
And you're going to set yourself up for failure. And here's the last thing. Give yourself the option to exit, but you don't have to actually exit. This is the interesting thing. I get a lot of people, because we're in a similar business in a way. I've had multiple exits, and I've got a real passion for helping people not go through what I went through the first couple of times. I screwed it up. It's about giving yourself the option. You don't have to sell the business. You could literally become the passive owner of the business. I mean, it's about extracting yourself from the day-to-day running of the business. And that's what most business owners, they get to a point where they just can't do it anymore. And then
sometimes family enters into that if you've got
unplanned circumstances, health issues. We all assume that we're going to be in control of the exit. There are a lot of owners that end up having a health crisis or an accident or something where they're gone. And now the family need to figure out how to take this asset that was run by the person who's no longer there or incapable of doing the business anymore, right?
a good story on that one too. I had a manufacturer owned business with a partner. The partner was in his 70s. This guy was probably, I think, 55-ish. Wanted to buy out his partner. His partner wanted to sell. The 55-year-old contacted me on, kind of ways to grow the business. And I said, you know what? You should buy out your partner first.
Yeah.
And then we can work on ways to grow the business. Because if we grow the business, then that just means you have to pay more to buy out your partner.
Right.
And the ironic thing about that whole story was I didn't hear from him for a while. It was not somebody we ended up doing business with. Called a few months later and he was killed in an accident. The business ended up being bought by his 21-year-old kid and his mom.
Yeah.
It was a really sad story, but death happens. Sometimes it does.
It happens a lot more than we think. And I work with a lot of multi-generational businesses where dad passed away. There was no transition. The oldest son or daughter takes over the business, is actually not happy with having to rescue this business. Wasn't their plan, but they feel obligated because it's a family business. Mom still needs to get paid. There's all kinds of extenuating circumstances. And then they regret the fact that they spent the last 20 years building this business that they never wanted to be in. So it has legacy issues. It has generational impact. But the ironic thing is then they say, oh, well, I'm not going to put together a plan. I didn't have a plan. My kids can figure. I'm like, you just told me about how horrible that was for you, and you're going to do that to your children? They're like, I didn't think about it that way. I'm thinking this is why we need to talk, because there are lots of things we haven't thought about.
And a lot of times the kids, they're not qualified.
And there's a whole nother discussion, we can have multiple podcast discussions around the different topics. There's a whole nother discussion about this next generation is actually buying businesses, and they're not starting businesses. The wisdom now is don't start a business. It takes 2 years. You're going to lose money. It's a lot of work. You don't have the patience or the skill. buy a business, run it, but the fact is they don't know how to run a business. So they actually need people like us to guide them to set the business up for success. Better to do it up front than to wait until you're ready to exit and then try to fix everything. But like I said, that's another podcast topic for another day. I know that people are listening to this and they're going to want to know how to get in touch with you. So what's the best way to get in touch with you to tap into that wisdom and that guidance that you're going to be able to offer people that are now considering their exit?
Okay, I would say probably the easiest is just to email me. I mean, we have a website, CFG Legacy Planners, but you can also reach me at mike@cfglp.com.
Okay, great. And we'll put that in the description for this podcast show. So you don't have to worry if you didn't get that. Check the description below the video. It's all there. And I'd encourage you to reach out to Mike. If you're thinking about, exit, or if you're thinking, just even thinking it's something you want to make sure you've got the option to do, guys like Mike are, worth their weight in gold. So I'd encourage you to do that. So Mike, listen, I appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us, and more importantly, to take that and share that with people who haven't gone through the journey yet. So you're truly a C-Suite Sherpa in that respect. So thanks for being on the podcast, and I've enjoyed talking to you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. I've enjoyed it as well.